Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dynasty Daddy channel, and this is a little bit different than usual. We're going to start a new series of weekly videos during the season to break down just the big news, any injuries, big performances, dynasty strategy, or fantasy football strategy in general. We'll be covering those weekly, so you can come to expect that here. And if you want a more deep dive or answer your specific questions, we do have a Tuesday night, 9 p.m. live stream where we just talk trades and all of that. It gets a little weird towards hour 2, but it just goes pretty much all night, and it's always a good time. So I hope to see you there. Unfortunately, today we obviously got to talk about the big news. Joe Burrow is injured. He's got turf toe. It's going to sideline him for a minimum of 3 months. It sounds like he does need to have surgery for it. This is tough. Obviously, Joe Burrow is someone that was drafted early in drafts. It's one of the big 5, big 6 quarterbacks in terms of dynasty value. And a lot of people expected him to come back and do what he did last year, which was absolutely dominate. That was a good intro. You think that's good? Or
is beautiful.
Executive producer over there. So. I guess, yeah, 3 months is season ending, right? Basically.
Yeah, it puts him like December, which, if the Bengals even have anything to play for, probably not rushing Joe Burrow back. And that's a minimum, too. So my expectation is throughout the end of the season.
So what do we do? All the Burrow hopefuls, what are the actionable items we can take away from an elite quarterback getting injured? If you're a rebuilder, dust off the Sleeper app and actually go out and make some trades. Very few players like this ever become available. And since you don't care about points, you can get an elite player at a discount whose value will certainly rebound. And we have seen that with this exact example. With Joe Burrow suffering 3 season-ending injuries, we've seen his value recoup every single time. Now, will it be the same as it was pre-injury this year? I don't know. We can certainly expect him to come back with some high level of value. And when you're a rebuilder, all you need is to try to build centerpieces that you can build your team around. And Burrow certainly is one of those. I mean, he already had the injury-prone label. And then last year, he was so phenomenal that everyone was like, oh, he's not injury-prone anymore. Like, oh, I don't care about that. I will risk it because he could be QB3, QB4. If I have Jamar Chase and I stack him, like you're basically winning every week. Now we kind of open up that can of worms again of, oh, he is injury prone. We have another injury on a team that just doesn't seem to invest enough in the offensive line and protecting Joe Burrow.
But for Burrow specifically, I think obviously we talked about it, very good target for rebuilders. I would be wary and cautious about adding firsts onto quarterbacks that you feel like you're tearing up from a Herbert to go get Burrow, and you added a first so you can lock in that top 5, top 6 dynasty quarterback. I think that would be a little rich just when you look at the, expected production and difference between, multiple pocket passing quarterbacks. But still, like we saw in the player comparison chart from DynastyDaddy.com, Burrow, we've seen regain the value, and obviously holding off on needing point production is what you want to do as a rebuilder. Or as far as expectations for the rest of the Bengals, starting with Jamar Chase, obviously wide receiver 1 across the board, KeepTradeCut, sleeper, startup ADP, underdog expectations for, redraft for this next season, wide receiver 1. I wouldn't expect that, even though we saw some monster production from this game specifically for Jake Browning. We did see in 2023 with Burrow's last injury, we saw Browning take over for the second half of the year, and in those final 7 games, we saw Jamar Chase with just under 5 receptions a game, 6.5 targets, 63.83 yards, and only 1 touchdown in that span. The one nice thing about Jake Browning, I will say, is that he's willing to push the ball down the field. We saw him still be top 6 in yards per attempt, which is nice to see. And I think the Bengals passing offense will still be open up enough to give Jamar Chase wide receiver 1 production, but not necessarily the wide receiver 1 production.
It's always hard to repeat. Wide receiver 1s typically don't, even though Jamar Chase is still a locked-in low wide receiver 1 on your fantasy team.
For T. Higgins, we saw in this last game, obviously Browning having to come in on the fly, really hyper-target Jamar Chase. T. Higgins still, made way, found himself a touchdown in that game. Like I said, with Chase, Browning is still able and willing to push the ball down the field, which is obviously nice for T. Higgins. I think we'll still see some spike week games, but I would not expect, as much of the easy target stuff that we saw for Chase in this last game. I think the offense will still kind of funnel and flow through Chase. In the same stretch of games that we saw with Chase, with T. Higgins, one less game with the injury in 2023, but 3.5 receptions, 5.5 targets, and more yardage, just under 80 yards, and actually 3 total touchdowns. So still think that this offense with a terrible defense is going to be pushing the ball, passing a lot with Browning. And I think T. Higgins will still give you some spike weeks, but yeah, like I said, I think you do have to limit expectations.
The fundamentals of the team haven't changed. It's still a team with a terrible defense and a team that really needs to rely on scoring points. Add in the fact that Browning, historically, when he does come in, they still expect him to throw the ball and air the ball out a ton. I expect the wide receiver production to still be there. It will probably be less efficient than obviously having one of the best quarterbacks in the league and Joe Burrow there. But we can still expect from a fantasy football perspective, Chase and Higgins are still going to be very much involved and still valuable.
For Chase Brown, obviously we didn't see a sample size with him with Jake Browning in 2023, but the usage and role is awesome. But the running has been super inefficient. The Bengals offense, out of shotgun that we've seen a lot with Burrow has been pretty inefficient running the ball. Brown, I think the usage still warrants him being a locked-in starter, back-end running back 1, high-end RB2.
If you had to pick one, you got Chase, Higgins, Brown. What do you feel will be impacted the most?
Yeah, I think probably T. Higgins, but I think that's kind of an easy cop-out answer just because I think T. Higgins naturally is kind of a spike week guy in that offense, and that it tends to flow through both of the chases we've seen just in usage for this season specifically. So I think T. Higgins is probably the one I'm most quote-unquote afraid of, but I do still feel confident enough in the stretch we saw from Jake Browning in 2023, and an offense still is giving decent production to the wide receiver. All right, now we're going to take a look at some trades for Joe Burrow first, specifically on the fantasy football trade database on the site. All right, let's start with this one right here. We've got Joe Burrow for Jaden Higgins and Kyler Murray, tearing down to Kyler and getting Jaden Higgins in a 12-team start 12 full PPR. Is Jaden Higgins an interesting enough piece for you to tear down off of Joe Burrow to Kyler?
I don't know. I probably would want a little bit more on in my brain, but a 12-team start 12, Jaden Higgins isn't the worst thing to add. Like, is probably a decent flex into the starting lineup type of guy that does have some upside. And it also depends how desperate you are as a Joe Burrow bag holder, especially in a 12-team start 12. It's going to be hard to really get a lot of value. So the fact that you can just get a Kyler and be like, cool, I'm going to lock in a guy that, even though he sucked last year, as everyone said, was still, QB 10, I think, in most formats. You're going to have to bite the bullet a little bit because Burrow's value is falling. We're not going to really see him playing meaningful fantasy football snaps probably until, 2025 or 26.
Yeah. I think the tough thing for me with this kind of deal, and I get it, in a 12-team start 12, like adding a piece and still getting a starting quarterback that you feel decent about for the rest of the season is something you want to do. Like, you want to have additional receivers to be able to throw into your flexes when you have to start 12. As a contender, if I was making this kind of move, I think I would want the piece to feel a little bit more, I would want to be more confident in the production for this season specifically versus what I think Jaden Higgins is going to give me from what I've seen from the Houston offense so far. Either stronger of a dynasty asset, when I'm biting that bullet with moving off of Joe Burrow, or a better contending piece for me to be making this tier down.
A Hunter Renfrow, you mean?
Exactly. All right, next trade here, we've got Joe Burrow and a second for Jalen Hurts. And I think you would need to pay more to move up to Hurts. But if this was like a first-second swap, like the Hurts side is getting a second and you're getting a first on the Burrow side, would you do this?
I mean, absolutely. I'm surprised. Like, if you have Hurts, you probably are a pretty decent team. So it is kind of a weird trade of like, why would you trade away Hurts for Burrow if your team isn't in that win now spot? And like you said, I mean, this is a trade I would have taken last week. It's not a trade that I would certainly not do now. I mean, I feel like you would at least need a first on the Burrow side just to get a Hurts back. My theory, here's my, tinfoil hat theory. I think this was a trade someone sent out and it was sitting in their trades for like a month. And then right when that injury happened, he's like, actually, I'm just going to accept it. That is my theory, because I do not see a tier up to what is the big four. And Hurts hasn't been phenomenal so far, but his floor is just so high. I mean, his floor is like 20 points a game. He's the definition of I just fall forward and get 2 touchdowns a game running.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where you're getting a little too cute. Maybe the Hurts manager, the rest of the roster was pretty rough and they were already kind of leaning towards a rebuild and wanted to tear off of the elite quarterback to, get some assets. And they see the tanking aspect of having a QB that's going to hold value later, but is injured for the rest of the year. But I think this is just being too cute. I mean, you have the value insulation for Jalen Hurts in his own right with the contract extension he's gotten. So yeah, I think even if it was the first, second swap, I'm definitely easily doing the Hurts side.
It's all the tush-push propaganda that we saw from Fox.
Exactly. All right, next up, we're going to look at some Jake Browning trades. I think the most obvious replacement for a Joe Burrow manager for the rest of the season is Jake Browning, which, a lot of times you don't want to just slot in, similar enough production for a backup quarterback to a starter. But I think, what we saw in 2023, you got to feel at least confident that, Jake Browning, who's going to give you some interceptions for sure, is at least going to have the passing volume to give you decent super flex starting quarterback weeks. Maybe 3. Yeah. But this one right here, I like this one. This is 12 team, start 9, pretty shallow league, and you are getting Jake Browning and a second for Jaylen Warren, who's been, pretty solid role for the Steelers. But I think in a 12 team start 9, at least in my opinion, this is the perfect kind of let me replace what I lost in Joe Burrow with Jake Browning for the rest of the season. And, you get a second for Jaylen Warren, which, maybe you're just getting a free Jake Browning on this trade. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting a great discount on a Jake Browning. And that being said, I mean, Jake Browning, when he was starting back in 2023, he was putting up, solid QB1 weeks. So it's not like you're getting a, Spencer Rattler type where you're like, well, great, I got 8 points on my QB spot. Like, why am I trading for this? And we even saw, he played 2.5 quarters. He had 3 interceptions. You're like, man, he didn't do well. He still also put up like 20 fantasy points in some formats. So he will air the ball out. It will certainly won't be efficient. It won't always be pretty, but he will score. And the fact that you can basically, take a Jaylen Warren, which we don't really know what his long-term role is. Not that I'm feeling too confident about Caleb Johnson after the start to the season, but yeah, I mean, I think this is a decent deal for saying, let me lock in that quarterback, especially if you have Joe Burrow and you don't want to trade. Just locking in a Jake Browning, you're like, cool, I still will get decent production. And if Burrow's out, I just roll with Browning. And then if Burrow's in, I just have his back.
We've got 2 Jake Browning for a third trades here. We look at this top one here, 12 team, start 10. Jake Browning for a 2027 third. If you need the fill-in, you need the quarterback for the rest of the season after the Burrow injury, are you just going to send a third for Jake Browning?
I mean, I certainly would send that. I think if I have Jake Browning, I would hope to get a little bit more. Like, I think like 2/3 or something. Like, to me, I'm like a third. I'm like, why, what's the rush,
Yeah, especially in some of these shallower leagues, like we see in that 12 team start 9, like a lot of times the quarterback that's going to start for the rest of the season is more impactful for your roster than a third itself. So I think in some of these shallower leagues, the QB position is the one position that isn't actually shallow, because people do not want to be starting a lot of these lower end quarterbacks. And I think a lot of people can talk themselves into Jake Browning just being 75% of Burrow for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that in 2023. He had not similar production to Burrow, but similar to 70% of Burrow's production. If he can put together some decent weeks, and I don't think a third gives me enough flexibility to where I'm like, okay, cool, like let me bail you out. Like you're out of Burrow, like let me bail you. If you have Burrow and he was just injured, how high would you go up for a Browning? Would you be like 2/3 is as high as I would go, or would you be like, I'll go with like a late second?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting names that you could target that I think have a little bit more longevity and upside than going to Jake Browning just through the end of the season. It's not like Jake Browning's going to, take over for Joe Burrow next year if he has an amazing end of the season. But, I think obviously Daniel Jones, I think is a name you could target as far as, the start of the season, 2-0 for the Colts. We're seeing the rushing production, decent offensive system. I think there's some names like that if I am already getting to paying a second for Jake Browning, I might just try to see if I can. I would not want to do that kind of pay for a different quarterback for like the Russell Wilsons or Joe Flacco's of the world. I think I would want a little bit more dynasty value upside in like a Daniel Jones. So I think I probably wouldn't pay more than 2/3 in a league where I really need a starter for Jake Browning. I think the more unique moves are like the one we saw with Jaylen Warren, where you're able to move an interesting piece that has value at the moment, get a pick back, and then feel like you're getting Jake Browning kind of added on for additional tax for that deal. I think if I was going to be paying up or moving interesting players or picks, I would want to do something like that where I'm getting another asset in some capacity that's helping even out that value. I admittedly do not have a lot of Joe Burrow across my leagues. In the 2024 season, I found myself tearing up or tearing down off of him. Just, I love Burrow, but I think the like pocket passer aspect of the quarterback position, even though I know the Bengals defense is going to be terrible for years to come, is kind of hard for me to buy in dynasty value asset wise. So let us know in the comments what deals you guys are making either for or getting off of Burrow, or Jake Browning deals, or other replacement quarterback deals. Would be interested to hear those in the comments, or Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time for our Dynasty Trade Show weekly, keeping the train going. 2+ hours, maybe, or whenever I have to pee.
Yep.